Welcome to Betrayal Stories. In today's video, I want to share something that had never happened to me before. Something I wasn't prepared for. Something that arrived so quietly, so gently, that by the time I realized its weight, it was already inside me. I remember standing there, frozen, breathing through a feeling I didn't have words for. It wasn't pain. It wasn't excitement. It was something deeper, heavier, and strangely overwhelming. It reached into places I didn't even know were empty. And for a moment, all I could do was stand there, stunned by how quickly it unraveled the version of myself I thought I understood. Before I continue, I want to ask you for something sincerely. If stories like this matter to you, stories about honesty, silence, and the complicated truths we rarely say out loud, please subscribe to the channel. I truly need your support right now more than ever. And every single subscriber helps this space grow. For most of my adult life, I believed my limits were fixed. I believed I knew exactly where I ended and where I would never go. I trusted my boundaries. I trusted my discipline. I trusted the version of myself that had always been reliable, measured, and steady no matter what life placed in front of me. That certainty gave me comfort. It made the world feel manageable, predictable, safe. What I didn't know then was how fragile certainty really is. How it only takes one quiet fracture, one moment of unguarded truth for everything you believe about yourself to shift. The night my sense of self finally cracked open didn't begin with intention or temptation. It didn't start with desire. It began with exhaustion. I was standing alone in my kitchen long after midnight. The house hummed softly around me, filled with familiar sounds I barely noticed anymore. The refrigerator clicked on and off. The clock marked time I felt disconnected from. Everything felt suspended, as if the world itself had slowed down. That's when my phone lit up. A message from someone I didn't expect. From someone I pretended I didn't want to hear from. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Long enough to understand that the danger wasn't in the message itself. It was in how honest I was being with myself while reading it. Sometimes, most dangerous moments aren't loud or dramatic. They're the quiet ones, when no one is watching and you're forced to confront the truth you've been avoiding. I hadn't always felt this restless. There was a time when my life fit me perfectly. Daniel and I met in our 20s, when wanting felt simple and the future felt generous. Back then, dreams came easily. We believed effort was enough to sustain love forever. Daniel was steady in a way that felt rare even then, thoughtful, kind, dependable, without being boring. He remembered details most people forgot. He showed up when he said he would. He listened, truly listened. When he proposed, it wasn't dramatic. There were no speeches or grand gestures. It felt like a quiet agreement between two people choosing to build something solid together. And we did. We built a life that reflected our values, warm, orderly, full of routines that made life run smoothly. Sunday grocery trips that became tradition, shared playlists on long drives, inside jokes that belonged only to us from the outside. It looked like everything people are told to want for years. I mistook comfort for fulfillment. No one warns you that comfort, if left unquestioned, can slowly hollow you out. Not violently, not suddenly, but gently, almost kindly, until one day you realize something essential is missing. The change was gradual. So gradual that neither of us could point to when it began. We still loved each other. We still touched, but desire softened into something polite. Intimacy became another responsibility, squeezed between work, fatigue, and routine. We stopped surprising each other. We stopped wondering, and somewhere along the way, stopped feeling seen. I didn't go looking for that feeling elsewhere. I wasn't unhappy enough to justify it. Not desperate enough to name the ache out loud. I told myself this was just what long marriages looked like. That wanting more was immature, unrealistic, ungrateful. Then I met Evan. He wasn't a stranger who swept into my life dramatically. He existed on the edges of it first. Someone Daniel worked with. A name mentioned casually at dinner. Someone who belonged to our shared orbit. The first time we spoke properly was at a company gathering I attended out of obligation. I stood near the drinks table, half listening to conversations that blurred together. Evan didn't blur. He spoke to me directly, asked a question that required thought, and then he waited for the answer. That pause changed something in me. He didn't look past me. He didn't rush the moment. His attention rested on me fully, as if there was nowhere else he needed to be. I felt it immediately, a quiet charge in the air, and just as quickly. I told myself to ignore it, but awareness, once awakened, doesn't go back to sleep. Over the weeks that followed, our interactions multiplied in small, seemingly innocent ways. A shared look, a lingering conversation, a joke that lasted a little too long. Nothing happened. Nothing had to. The possibility alone was intoxicating. I hated myself for noticing, and I hated myself for how alive it made me feel. The moment I crossed the invisible line wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned. Daniel was away on a short trip. The house felt larger, emptier. Evan sent a message, casual, carefully worded, heavy with implication. He suggested a drink. No expectations. Just company. I knew what I was agreeing to before I typed yes. Sitting across from him in the low light of the bar, I felt like a version of myself I barely recognized. Alert, awake, aware of every breath and movement. We talked about safe things at first. Then the conversation deepened. He shared things he rarely shared. I did the same. When he reached for my hand. It didn't feel shocking. It felt inevitable. What followed wasn't about impulse. It was about surrender, about being overwhelmed by the intensity of being wanted fully, unapologetically. I remember pressing my palm to the wall, my heart racing, asking him to slow down, not because I didn't want it, but because I felt undone by how deeply I did. Afterward, I waited for shame to arrive. It didn't. What I felt instead was calm, awareness, as if a light had been turned on inside me after years of darkness. That scared me more than guilt ever could. I told myself it would never happen again. And in a way, it didn't. Years passed. Daniel never knew. Our life continued outwardly unchanged. But I had changed, and there was no reversing it. The ache returned. Not for Evan specifically, but for what he represented. Depth, intensity, presence. I wanted that again. Not in secrecy. Not in fragments. I wanted it in my marriage. Asking for it was harder than anything I had done before. When I finally spoke, the words came out fragile and clumsy. The hurt in Daniel's eyes stayed with me longer than any argument could have. Then one evening, he sat beside me and admitted his own sense of loss, his own fears. He said he didn't want to become someone else, but he wanted to rediscover who we were together. I cried harder than I had in years. Healing wasn't immediate. It was slow, honest, imperfect, but it was real, and for the first time in a long while, I stopped wondering who I was capable of being. I started choosing her instead. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's this: betrayal doesn't always begin with another person. Sometimes it begins with silence, and sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do isn't resisting temptation. It's telling the truth. Thank you for listening to Betrayal Stories.